Just a few hours ago, President Trump held a press conference in the Oval Office in the White House, and he was sitting there with Chancellor Merz from Germany, who's there for a visit, and he took a few questions from reporters about Iran, and he touched on a number of very important issues. The big one that he talked about, and this is the first time we've had really clear messaging from the administration, was what they're looking for in terms of regime change. So we'll get to that. That comes a little bit later. But first, he was asked about something that a lot of people in the America First movement are talking about, which is the idea that Israel dragged America into a war, that Israel dragged America in, that America didn't want to go to war right now, but Israel basically forced America's hand. I made a whole video about this earlier today. If you haven't seen it, make sure to go watch that video and just snoop around. You'll see, basically what happened in short, if you haven't seen it, is that Secretary of State Rubio said that when it was asked why now, like why did the attacks happen now? And he said, well, the Americans believed that the Israelis were going to hit the Iranians anyway, and that the Iranians were going to retaliate against the Americans, and that's what dragged them into this. He didn't use the word drag, but it was really taken out of context. He wasn't talking about why we're going to war. He was talking about why it happened on the day that it happened. I lay that all out in that other video. Make sure you go watch that because it's something a lot of people are talking about. And President Trump was asked about that earlier today. So let's go ahead and hit the clip, and I'll stop it where relevant and talk about what's going on here.
Any questions, please?
Mr. President, did Israel force your hand to launch these strikes against Iran? Did that not force the United States into this war?
No, I might have forced their hand. You see, we were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that. And we have great negotiators, great people that do this very successfully and have done it all their lives very successful. And based on the way the negotiation was going, I think they were going to attack first. And I didn't want that to happen. So if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. But Israel was ready and we were ready. And we've had a very, very powerful impact because virtually everything they have has been knocked out now. Their missile count is going way down. Amazingly, they're hitting countries that were, let's call them neutral, right? They lived together for a long time. I think they were surprised. I was surprised. And now those countries are all fighting against them and fighting strongly against them. Someday they'll write a story and they'll say why they did that. But they hit countries that had nothing to do with what's going on. They were sort of leaving everything alone. All of a sudden they had missiles shot in, which shows you the level of evil that we're dealing with. They'll hit people that were actually at least somewhat friendly, and they had no problems with it. Also hitting only civilian places, hotels and apartment buildings.
Okay, so we talked about this in an earlier video over the last couple of days. This terrible miscalculation by the Iranians, firing missiles, attacking these other Muslim states around them. And it's really turned the whole Arab world, pretty much, most of the Arab world, against the Iranian regime. But you see also there that President Trump basically says, no, the Israelis didn't drag us into it. It was our assessment that the Iranians were going to attack first. Now, how do you square that away with what Rubio said, that it happened now because the Israelis were going to attack and that was going to lead to a retaliation by Iran? Look, that's where Rubio's words were misconstrued. What he was saying was they knew that the Iranians were going to attack the American assets, and they knew that the Israelis were planning to attack also, meaning after all the American assets get moved into the region over the last few weeks and everyone knew strikes were coming, in that dynamic, they were worried about the Iranians then making a preemptive strike. That's how Trump puts it. He had a feeling, and meanwhile, there was intelligence coming in that they were planning to strike the Americans in the event that the Israelis would strike, and the Israelis wanted to carry out a preemptive strike. Anyway, bottom line is, no, America was not dragged into the war by Israel.
And we're hitting them where it is much more appropriate. We're hitting them very hard. And the big scale hitting goes now. They no longer have air protection. They no longer have any detection facilities at all left. And So they're going to.
Okay, important point. They no longer have air protection. They no longer have detection facilities, meaning radar, all the detection. That means that American fighter jets, Israeli jets, drones can now operate freely over the skies. It basically means that taking out regime targets is now like shooting fish in a barrel. And I don't know what happens next for Iran because it's only getting degraded further from here, but we'll see. So that's huge.
They're going to be in for a lot of hurt. These are bad people. These are people that killed. I guess it's 35,000. It's coming out 35,000 over the last 3 weeks. Protesters, 35,000 violently killed. So these are bad people. And the leader of the pack is gone. And as you know, 49 people were taken out in the first hit. And I guess there was another hit today on the new leadership. And it looks like that was pretty substantial also. So they're getting hit very hard, and we'll see what happens. A lot of people are coming forward. A lot of the people you would least suspect want to quit. They want to have immunity. They're asking for immunity, and probably at some point they'll be dropping, as you would say, laying down their guns. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, we're just continuing to go forward. Our military is the #1 in the world by far, and we are. Everything's big in my book. Venezuela.
Yeah, before we go on to the next point he's going to make, this is also huge. We hadn't seen reporting of this, but he's saying it now. And remember, the president of the United States has access to information that does not get out to the media, and there's an internet blackout. The internet is down all over Iran. So all we get is the regime media coming out. And that's why it's so important to listen when Trump says things like this, that there are many people coming forward who want to now basically desert the Iranian regime. They want to change sides. They want to lay down their weapons. And he expects this to ramp up more in the coming days. That's one of the things I've said we need to look for. At what point do people start saying, I'm out? And that's the real sign that the regime is going to fall. Okay, now he's going to go on and he's going to mention Venezuela, which I think is quite significant.
Venezuela was big. This is big. The original hit, Midnight Hammer, was big. Everything you view is big, but it's not considered very big by some standards. By some.
You notice he said Venezuela was big, Midnight Hammer was big. This is big. This is all a big thing. Now Venezuela is connected to this because Venezuela and Iran were really. It's more than that. They were allies. They were actually like business partners. They were almost like two branches of one company. I made a video about the Venezuela-Iran connection at the Israel 365 News YouTube channel a few weeks ago during all of this lead up. And it was right around the time that the Venezuela action was taken, where I talked about how this is kind of a precursor to taking down Iran, because taking down Venezuela is really cutting off a piece of the Iranian regime's apparatus. And maybe I'll do another video on that to explain it. But the Venezuela thing is intimately connected to the Iran situation. They really, again, they were really like intertwined business partners.
Some of our standards, we have a military like no other military that's ever been built.
Mr. President, what's the worst case scenario that you have planned for in Iran?
Well, I don't know if there's a worst case. We have them very much beaten militarily from the military standpoint. They're still lobbing some missiles. At some point, they won't even be able to do that because we're hitting all of their carriers. We're hitting all of their missile stock. You know, they built up all these missiles over the last few years. They had a lot of them. They've shot a lot of them, and we're knocking out a lot. I guess the worst case would be we do this, and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen. That would probably be the worst. You go through this, and then in 5 years, you realize you put somebody in who is no better. So we'd like to see somebody in there that's going to bring it back for the people. And we'll see what happens with the people. You know, they have their chance. And we've said, don't do it yet. If you're going to go out and protest, don't do it yet. It's very dangerous out there. A lot of bombs are being dropped. But I would say that would be about the worst.
Do you have someone in mind right now? Because you said all the people you did have in mind have been taken out. What do you think?
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, you know, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group. They may be dead also. based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody. But we have, Venezuela was so incredible because we did the attack and we kept government totally intact. And we have Delcy, who's been very good. We have the whole chain of command, and they've been, look, the relationship's been great. We've taken out 100 million barrels of oil already. And a big part of that goes to them and a big part goes to us. And it's been great. We paid for the war many times over, and we're going to be running the oil. And Venezuela is going to make more money than they ever made, and that's great for the people. The relationship has been great. It's been seamless. Nobody's actually ever seen anything like it. If you look at Iraq, where very stupidly everybody was fired, the generals were fired, the military was fired, the police were fired, the fire departments were fired, and all of the government workers were fired. So after, people would call, they had no idea. And by the way, ISIS was formed. That's where ISIS came from, all of the fired people. We don't believe in that. So we'll see what happens. But first, we have to finish off the military.
Okay, this is massive. Let's unpack what we just heard there. So for starters, he says that the people that we had in mind are dead, and then the other people we had in mind are also probably dead, which means that what he had in mind from the get-go is that the regime change is actually some of those top leadership who are part of the more moderate wing, the reformers, who could step forward and they know how things run. Notice he compared it to the Venezuela situation. Let's walk through what he said here. In Venezuela, Maduro was removed, but the government, as he said, they kept the government intact. And number two to Maduro, this Delcy, ended up becoming the person that America's using as their puppet. This is great for stability. Okay, it keeps because you have the technocrats and the government people who are running the show still there. It holds things together. You don't have chaos. You have people who I suppose have competence, who can continue to run things. And you've changed the top, and America is involved. And that's obviously an improved situation. The problem is you're dealing with the same criminals who ran the regime beforehand, and it doesn't necessarily move it towards democracy. So this is something I've been warning about, the possibility that this would end with what I've been calling fake regime change, which would mean that the second or third tier people end up, under the guise of being more moderate and not part of the regime. And it's a new regime, but it's really the same people running the show. Now, that could be better. Obviously, it would be much, much better than the regime because they would be more moderate. They probably wouldn't be ideologically Islamic in the same way, and that already eases things up. But that doesn't mean that the regime ceases to be a corrupt regime. It doesn't mean that those people don't still harbor that Islamic ideology somewhere. And it could, if they remain in power, it could grow up again into the regime down the road. So there's a lot of dangers here. It certainly doesn't free the Iranian people from the criminals who've been oppressing them and destroying their lives and murdering them for all these years. It keeps a lot of them in power. But you see what he wants here. He wants stability. And then he pointed out Iraq, they actually got rid of everybody when the Iraqi regime fell. And in that regime change, you ended up with abject chaos. The Americans had to be in on the ground. And then you had ISIS that grew out of the chaos. So he's right on that point. So his best case scenario, Trump's best case scenario, this is what he's saying he's looking for, is to keep the structure of the bureaucracy intact and keep some of the people who are near the top who have competence and professionalism and have them take over. That's what he's looking for in regime change. So if we're picturing a kind of toppling and then the people rise up, he's got a very strong point here. There's a lot of chaos in there. We all picture it working out well, but what he's looking for is that the transition is to professionals who already know how to run things. Again, the danger then being that they're actually corrupt criminals who were running the place before. And then the question for long term is, how does that transition into democracy? What role does America play in in kind of policing that so that it doesn't turn into another Islamic dictatorship or another just dictatorship? How does that look? But this is the first time, and I've been watching this as closely as anybody, this is the first time that Trump has actually given us a signal about what he wants to see in terms of regime change. So this is huge. This is very interesting. And it's obviously now gives us a direction to look for to see, are things moving in the direction of what Trump is hoping for down the road. He also made a very matter-of-fact point. People always talk about, oh, regime change always works out badly. He says, look, the worst-case scenario is that you have someone who's as bad as these guys. Notice, he didn't say the worst-case scenario is you have someone worse. You know why? Because there isn't anyone worse. What could be worse than a regime that chants death to America, death to Israel, invests all of its resources in that project of causing death to Israel, building proxies all over the region, starving its own people, slaughtering its own people? You don't, shipping drugs all over the world, setting up shop in Venezuela and Paraguay, and getting involved in drug trafficking and human trafficking. If you go down the list of what the Iranian regime is, he didn't say the worst case scenario is something worse. There is nothing worse. And we should keep that in mind also, because if this does degenerate into some sort of chaos, understand that the chaos may look worse. It's not worse than living under the Iranian regime and what the Iranian regime did to the rest of the world. In Iran, if we come out of this and there's some chaos in Iran and they're simply not threatening the rest of the world, yes, I feel bad for the Iranian people, and it's up to them to take control of their country. And I like the fact that the Americans keep saying that it's up to the Iranian people. We're not going to come in there and colonize you, okay? It's up to the Iranian people to do this. And that's great messaging. But we should also bear in mind that nothing could be worse for the world, and certainly not for Israel, than a regime like this one. So worst case scenario, you get someone just as bad. And that's a window into Trump's thinking there. But I think, again, just to hammer home the big point of this video, Trump has now told us what he's looking for in terms of regime change. He's looking for people to lay down their weapons, to switch sides, moderates to come forward. And he wants people who are in the government. He wants the government to remain intact, unlike Iraq, more like what happened in Venezuela. That's what he said in this clip. Huge statement from President Trump from earlier today. All right, that's the update. Please keep watching this channel. Please tell everyone what we're doing. If you believe that following this war through my commentary has been helpful, please tell other people about it. Please share this. We're still trying to grow the channel, and we're so appreciative of everyone who's helped in that. And of course, please check out all the great content at the Israel 365 News channel. Especially go back and find that video I did a few weeks ago about Venezuela and Iran. God bless.